Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hey everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here for the Timeform US preview of Saturday's Grade 1 Pegasus World Cup Invitational, the feature race on that Pegasus World Cup Day card on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. We've got a full field of 12 signed on, an oversubscribed field actually, with 2 also eligible runners. And Craig, there's been some discussion about how this race might lack the star power that we've seen in the Pegasus in past years, but it definitely makes it a wide open race to handicap and bet.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't have the superstars we've had in some years past. I mean, we've seen horses like Gunrunner, for example, win this race. So yeah, maybe not there, but as a person who bets horses, I absolutely love this race. It's a deep, full field, not a whole lot of filler. I think you can make a case for almost every horse in the field, at least at some chance of winning. So I'm really looking forward to this one on Saturday.
Yeah, often years this Pegasus feels like the kind of race that has a field of 12, but there are only really 3 or 4 main contenders. As you said, not the case this year. There are a lot of horses that you can make a case for, and we're going to talk about a lot of the contenders in this race. But before we get to them, let's take a look at the entire field signed on for this Pegasus World Cup. And the likely favorite, I think I saw the early morning line favorite, is the number 10 CyberKnife, Craig. And he is definitely the horse to beat off his narrow loss in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile last time. I believe they stated this will be the last start of his career before he goes off to stud. And while he is definitely the one with the target on his back, he is clearly the one with the strongest credentials coming in. It's not like he's some standout in this race that has scared away anybody, because there are a lot of runners that are coming in with comparable speed figures and form lines that make it the wide open race that it is.
I totally agree with that. And also, you can't help but notice that he is drawn pretty far outside there in the 10 hole in this big field. And that's not always an easy trip to work out at Gulfstream Park, which is a mile and an eighth oval. So the start, that first turn comes up pretty soon after the start. And you better get positioned early. You're going to get caught wide.
Well, speaking of that run into the first turn, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector to see how these horses might sort themselves out in the opening furlongs of this Pegasus World Cup. And we do have some speed drawn to the inside, Craig. I agree that horses like the number 3 Riding with Biden and the number 5 Defunded are likely to go forward. The number 6 Art Collector, another horse that likes to be on the front end. We'll see if a horse like Stiletto Boy from the 11 post can possibly get into a forward position. But that first turn, as you said, does come up pretty quickly. And we do have about 4 or 5 runners that have done some of their best running on the lead. So it does feel like this pace could heat up, and you do see that fast pace flag showing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's interesting to note, CyberKnife, he's done okay off the pace, but he's not a horse who's going to come from the clouds either. He's generally fairly close up at mid-pack at worst, and he's shown pretty far back in the pace projector. So there's some others that have some more early foot than he does. I would imagine he's going to get used coming out of the gate, because I doubt Florent Giroux wants to be way back in 8th or 9th, whatever it is we're showing him there.
One of the new features in Timeform US, if you visit DRF mobile PPs, is the Timeform US finish projector. You can check that out by going to your DRF mobile PPs and tapping on the new Timeform US tab. And this is basically a visual representation of the Timeform US power picks that you might be familiar with from the classic Timeform US PPs. And Craig, this algorithm that Timeform US has for determining these picks, it spits out a pretty decisive result here, as the number 10 CyberKnife and the number 5 Defunded are shown ahead of the rest of the field, with that favorite winning the race.
Yeah, and it just comes down to their speed figures. They both run in the mid upper 120s in the past. The rest of this field is more lower 120s type on their best days, but it's not like they can't make an improvement. It's only a couple of points. So this is one where I'm not all that sold on this finish projector. I think it's probably a little closer than we're displaying.
Well, let's go through these contenders, and we'll begin with that likely favorite, the number 10 CyberKnife. And we'll take a look at his last race when he was narrowly beaten by Cody's Wish in that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. And this was a really game effort, Craig. We've seen this from CyberKnife before. When he gets into a fight with another horse, he's really going to battle that one all the way to the wire, and he just comes down on the wrong end of the head bob here.
Yeah, he fought all the way to the wire. Have no complaints with this effort whatsoever. He just came up a head short against the horse Cody's Wish, who was in really good form all of last year, particularly late. So no knocks on him. He ran that nice 128 speed figure that day. It was only at the 1 mile distance. He does stretch out to 1.125 miles, but he's handled that just fine before in the Haskell and the Arkansas Derby.
And Craig, I think you brought up an interesting point earlier with where he might be positioned early in this race, because he's generally been at his most consistent when he's able to attain some forward position in his races and move up freely. He can be a horse that gets a little bit headstrong in his races. So I don't think you want to see him getting ranked too far back in the pack. We saw that happen a little bit too back in the Pennsylvania Derby when he was just kind of out of position the entire way. I don't think he'd be able to win the Pegasus World Cup if he runs that kind of race back, but hopefully if he comes back with the performance that we saw from him last time and a similar trip to the one that he got in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, he would be pretty dangerous in here. Another horse that could take money in this race, drawn down towards the inside, is the number 1 Proxy. We'll take a look at his past performances in Timeform US. And Craig, if you're looking for a closer that's likely to pick up the pieces, I think a lot of people are going to wind up in this Godolphin Homebred's corner.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny you call him a closer. He certainly didn't start out his career that way. He seems pretty versatile to me. He's won races wire to wire. Last time when he won the Grade 1 Clark, he was pretty close up early, but it was a slow pace. I don't anticipate him being sitting second. I think he'll get a little better position than what the Timeform US pace projector shows. He's a horse who had trouble cracking through in top competition, and I'm not sure the Clark was top competition. It was Grade 1 in name only, but I don't want to knock the performance much. He still ran a 121 speed figure, probably hindered a little bit by the pace. We see that 123 final time, so I do view him as a contender in here, and he should get plenty of pace if he does use those closing tactics.
Yeah, I'm a little bit against Proxy in this race because I do worry that he's going to get a little bit too far back in here. He's not going to get the same kind of trip that we saw last time in the Clark when, as you were saying, the pace was just so slow and they got to sit right on top of it. I think we're going to see a more similar performance to 2 back in the Stephen Foster. And while he did get a pace to run in at that day and earn a nice speed figure, he just kind of lost contact with the field midway through the race. And we've seen that from Proxy a number of times where he takes a long time to wind up. And sometimes if he doesn't have his mind on running, his riders really have to get after him to kind of get him engaged in the race and make him really try. And in a big field like this, if he starts to pull those antics from the rail draw, I wonder if he could just wind up way too far back in this race. So I have some reservations about Proxy, especially if he's going to go off as the second choice in this race. Let's move to the outside and take a look at the number 5 Defunded and check out his last race when he easily won the Grade 3 native dancer, or native diver, I should say, at Del Mar in his last start. And Craig, this is a horse that feels like he's really come to hand recently at the end of his 4-year-old season for trainer Bob Baffert. I mean, he always had some talent, but he was never considered to be among the best runners in the Bob Baffert barn, but feels like he's taken his game to a new level since last summer.
He's certainly running nice speed figures. He's just run a string of 120s when he runs well. He had a couple races where he didn't run all that well, but yeah, he's a horse who's in good form. My one big concern with him was he seemed to be his horse who would have fit nicely in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, and they didn't enter him. And the reason given was that he doesn't ship very well, and they didn't want to go to Kentucky. Now, I don't always put a lot of stock in that kind of talk from trainers and connections because you never really know what the real story is, but shipping all the way across the country for a horse who may not like it. If you do like this horse, I would recommend watching him before the race and see how he's handling his surroundings.
Bob Baffert did also have Laurel River for that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile that was considered to be one of the favorites and ended up, unfortunately, having to be scratched at the last minute. So maybe that also was a reason why they didn't target Defunded at that race. I don't know what to make of that, Craig, but I do know that his last couple of races were really good. And wasn't quite a believer when he won that Awesome Again 2 back and earned that 123 time Formula speed figure, but he came back to repeat it. And also the two horses that finished directly behind him have since come back to run so well to say that maybe that Awesome Again was better than it seemed at the time, because Country Grammar came back with a big victory and a nice speed figure, as did Slow Down Andy, who was a good third in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile right behind CyberKnife in his next start. So just feels like Defunded is coming into this race in razor sharp form. And from what I've seen, he is working very well coming into this Pegasus World Cup. Let's also take a look at another horse coming off a last out victory. That's the number 7, Skippy Longstocking, and we'll take a look at his win in the Harlan's Holiday last time when he was beating a couple of other runners that are also showing up in this field, Simplification and O'Connor. And Skippy Longstocking, Craig, he can be a little bit of a Jekyll or Hyde kind of runner. When he's really on his game, he's capable of running some speed figures that could make him the winner of a race like this. But we've also seen him just completely fail to show up at times.
Yeah, he's an interesting horse. I know we were both kind of fans of him on the Triple Crown Trail last time. He ran a good race in the Wood. He showed up for the Preakness in the Belmont and certainly ran respectably in both of those. Finally got his nice win in the West Virginia Derby. Didn't really show up at all in the Pennsylvania Derby, but I assume something just didn't go right that day because he was laid off for a while. Didn't come back until the very last day of the year when he showed up at Gulfstream. And I liked what I saw from him there. I like that he showed good tactical speed, and more importantly, I like that 125 speed figure that he ran.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all of these horses coming out of that Harlan's Holiday. It's a race that I have a little bit of trouble with. I just didn't feel like it should have come up that fast visually. I know the speed figures are the speed figures. I'm not saying the number's wrong by any means, because Skippy Longstocking has run a number like that before. It just didn't feel like that strong of a race to me. And I think he really is taking a significant step up in class, like he was in that Pennsylvania Derby 2 back, and didn't handle the class test that day. So I'm curious to see what Skippy Longstocking can manage as he moves back into Grade 1 company here. And as for the others coming out of that Harlan's Holiday, Simplification, he was third in there. And I was hoping to see a little bit better from this horse, Craig. He was within striking distance of Skippy Longstocking at the top of the stretch. And I didn't like that he lost second at the very end to Pioneer of Medina.
You took the words right out of my mouth there. He was actually a horse I bet in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, and he didn't show up at all that day. He had a little bit of a tough trip, I guess, but it was pretty disappointing. So I guess it's a good sign that he rebounded a little bit in the Harlan's Holiday. He ran that 122 speed figure, but like you, I didn't like that he wasn't able to get second off of Pioneer of Medina, who did a lot of dirty work in that race and looked pretty ripe for the taking late, and Simplification just kind of flattened out.
We've also got O'Connor coming out of that race. He was fourth, beaten as the 6-5 favorite. And Craig, he's just a horse that looks a little bit overmatched at this level. And he also was done no favors by the post position draw.
Yeah, it's drawn on the far outside, obviously. Not good. His debut was good when he showed up here from Chile, ran a nice race, a decent speed figure. Bettors maybe thought a little bit more of that race than they should have, making him the 6-5 favorite in the Harlan's Holiday. He ran okay that day, but hard to see him making up 4 lengths on Skippy Longstocking and even a couple lengths on Simplification.
We also have a couple runners coming out of the Cigar Mile run at Aqueduct in early December. Let's take a look at the stretch run of that race. And both of these horses were involved in the photo finish, but neither could get by the game Mind Control, who went out a winner here. Get Her Number, though, was the one who got closest, Craig. And he actually briefly gets his head in front at the mid-stretch point there, but Mind Control able to battle back in between horses. And that is White Abarrio, the gray down towards the inside, who somewhat surprisingly was rallying from off the pace here. I know some people expected him to be on the early lead. I think both of these horses ran well, but I'm just not sure how strong of a race this Cigar Mile was as a whole.
Yeah, it does make you wonder. It was the last race for Mind Control. I wanted to call him Mind Your Biscuits, but Mind Control, who's as game as they come. And any other horse Get Her Number gets his head in front, he probably wins that race. But that doesn't change the fact that this was not the strongest Cigar Mile. You can see it in the speed figure, just the 120 getting beaten that Grade 1 race. So not the strongest field for me. And I also think you have to question the distance a little bit for Got Her Number in particularly. A because he just has never gone this far. That mile he ran fine, but we're adding another furlong on top of that. And I can't help but wonder in the Cigar Mile if he wasn't helped by that slow early pace. You can see the blue fractions, and sometimes that'll help horses run further than they really want to go.
Yeah, I think those are all good points about get her number, who definitely has some things to prove in this race. As for White Abarrio, Craig, I know that there is some buzz about him getting back to Gulfstream maybe being the key. He is 4 for 4 at Gulfstream and 0 for 6 at every other venue, so maybe he's just a horse for course, though he was winning races at Gulfstream and he seemed to be in good form and also getting great trips at the beginning of last year. And he ended up losing races when he stepped up against tougher company. So I'm not sure how much the horse for course thing really holds up. At the end of the day, he's just got to run a better race than he has in any of his recent starts.
Yeah, I would agree. It's been a while since he won. I think it was probably the Florida Derby was the last time he visited the winner's circle. He's thrown in some real clunkers in there, but he's had some decent efforts. When he runs well, he does seem to be a horse that makes his own good trips. He has decent tactical speed, but I'd want some value if I was going to play that horse for course angle alone.
Now, Craig, there's not a whole lot of crossover between last year's Pegasus World Cup and this one, but we do have the third place finisher from last year's Pegasus, who finished right behind Nixco and the winner, Life is Good. And that's Stiletto Boy, who is back in the race this year as a long shot. And we'll take a look at his last race when he finished second to Country Grammar in the San Antonio out at Santa Anita. He was coming off a layoff this day, and maybe he's going to do better second off the layoff, Craig, but he's going to have to if he's going to be a player in this race.
Yeah, he's one of those teams more like a bridesmaid than the bride. He never quite gets the job done. He's a horse I love watching. I love that he kind of came from more humble beginnings, starting at some smaller tracks and moving his way up. He always runs good speed figures. My one concern with him is he does his best running on the front end, and I'm just not sure how he's going to be able to get there, particularly from this outside post. We can see in his PPs when he doesn't make the front, he usually doesn't run one of his better races.
Yeah, he's a horse with talent. He's earned some gigantic speed figures in the past. I think you could just have to question whether he's still in that form right now as a newly turned 5-year-old. Let's take a look at the Charlestown Classic, which Art Collector won over the summer and West Virginia. And Greg, Art Collector is a horse that is always dangerous when he gets to the front end and is able to set a comfortable pace, as he was able to do this day at Charlestown. But he can be an all or nothing type. When that trip doesn't work out, you expect him to finish off the board.
Right. And sometimes even in this better company, when the trip does work out, he finishes off the board like he did at Churchill and what was not one of the stronger editions of the Clark there. So he's a horse who on his best day tends to run a 120 speed figure. If he catches a field that can win, he usually shows up and gets the job done. When he meets a field like this, he does not. And I just think he's in a bit over his head.
Also in that Charlestown Classic, finishing 5th, a dozen lengths behind Art Collector, was Last Samurai. We'll take a look at his past performances, and at least you can say he took a step in the right direction last time, Craig, ending a string of uncompetitive efforts with that close second in the tinsel. He's going to have to do a lot better than that if he's going to be competitive in this Pegasus, but there aren't too many true closers in this field, and he's a closer who's got a heck of a lot of blue color-coded pace figures scattered across his PPs. That's not likely to be the case on Saturday.
Yeah, he's one that I would hope they're going to take him back and try to make one big run. It's probably his only chance in a race like that. We see he's one of the more consistent horses. We only show his last 5 races. I think you can go back his last dozen races, and every one but maybe one is in that 1 teens range. And it just doesn't seem good enough to get the job done. So he'd be more a trifecta type horse at the very best for me.
And the last contender we'll mention is the number 3, Riding with Biden, kind of a nice Pennsylvania-based horse who has done a lot of winning in his career, but rarely has stepped up against this level of competition. And while he does appear to be in good form right now, having won 3 of his last 4 starts, this is a pretty serious class test.
This is a very big jump up. I know we talked about him on one of our Timeform US Pacecast after his last race, and maybe even a time before that when he won a big race or won a race at Delaware, if memory serves. He's run some pretty big numbers, but not big enough to compete in here. Particularly, he's one that does most of his best running on the front end. We show him up pretty close in the pace projector. I'm not doubting that he will be up front, but he's probably going to have to work harder than he wants to and is accustomed to doing to get there.
Well, Craig, let's take a look at our picks in this Pegasus World Cup. And I'm not surprised to see we've landed in slightly different directions because there are so many possible ways to go in this race. We've got a few of the same horses in there, but you're going to go with the number 7, Skippy Longstock, who I left out. And he's definitely a horse that's coming in off one of the best last out races over this track.
Yeah, I liked that race last time. I liked what I saw from him last year. I'm not sure what happened in the Pennsylvania Derby, but the layoff after kind of told me that something maybe just wasn't right physically. So I gave him a slight nod over the horse you're making, your selection, Defunded. Like I said, I would keep an eye on him in the paddock because he's definitely acted up before. Not sure if that shipping angle is valid or not, so I'd want to see it with my own eyes. If he's handling it fine and looks calm, then no problem.
Yeah, I did go for the number 5 Defunded. I put him on top. We'll see what kind of price he is, being the Bob Baffert shipper in this race with Irad Ortiz riding. I could see him taking a little bit of money. I think he's listed at 6-1 on the morning line. He's just coming in great form. I like everything I've seen from him recently. Even in his last race, when it seems like he got a perfect trip, he had some trouble at the start that day and had to rush up. It just feels like he's a horse that is not letting anything stop him right now. So I expect the trip to work out, and I think he's going to show up with a good effort. I do have CyberKnife in there. I see that you've left him out, Craig, and I assume that's just a value-based thing. I think he's probably going to run well in this race, but I understand just looking for some bigger prices because there are many ways to go to look for some long shots. I've got the number 9 Last Samurai in there, and I see you've included the number 11 Stiletto Boy in your picks.
Yeah, I worry about that post position for CyberKnife. I really do. I think he's one that's caught between a rock and a hard place with his running style. And he may be good enough to work out a trip, but it's not something I want to take what's going to be a pretty short price on.
Well, Craig's got the number 7, Skippy Longstocking on top, the number 5, Defunded for me in the Pegasus World Cup on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.